The scent hit him first, not the frankincense of the sanctuary, but the road. Sour sweat, wood smoke from a dozen nameless campfires, the iron tang of old blood that no stream could wash free. He'd stopped trying. Bertrard stood in the western door of the Palatine chapel, one hand braced against the bronze jamb, and the morning light fell across him like a verdict. He was a man shaped by withdrawals, shoulders that had once borne a knight's pauldrons now hunched under a stained woolen cloak, his frame still broad but beginning to hollow, the way a siege wall thins after months of bombardment. His face told the rest, a jaw that hadn't known a razor in weeks, eyes the color of hammered lead, and a scar that ran from temple to cheekbone, pale and ragged as a frozen lightning strike. Beneath the grime, his hair was the dun brown of winter bracken, matted where he'd slept against trees and stone. He carried no sword. He hadn't deserved one since August the chapel swallowed him. Marble columns rose like petrified trees into a vault of gold mosaic. Christ Pantocrator staring down from the dome with eyes that offered neither welcome nor reprieve. Bertrard's hobnailed boots struck the polished floor. Crack, 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 each step a violation of the silence. A few worshippers turned. He didn't see them. He was seeing the pass again, the way he saw it every night when sleep cornered him. The black mouths of the defiles, the Basque war cries splitting the dark, and Odo's hand reaching for him across the scree. He walked the nave's length without prayer. At the transept, a young deacon stepped forward to block his path, visibly recoiling from the smell. "I need confession," Bertrard said. His voice scraped like a shovel through gravel. I need confession." The deacon's protest died in his throat. Something in the pilgrim's eyes made theological debate impossible. He gestured toward a side chapel and fled toward the sacristy. Bertrard knelt at the rail. The marble was cold, even through the wool of his breeches, and he pressed his forehead against the stone until it hurt. Behind him, soft footsteps approached. Not the deacon's nervous shuffle, but a measured tread. The walk of a man who had forgotten how to hurry. "Rise, my son. The Lord hears better when his children stand." Bishop Fulcrad emerged from the shadows of the ambulatory. He was tall for a churchman, nearly Bertrard's own height, but where the soldier was blunt and eroding, the bishop was sharp as a reliquary blade. His face was long and angular, the cheekbones pronounced beneath parchment skin, and his eyes, deep set, the color of old amber, held a light that seemed to come from somewhere behind them rather than from any earthly source. He wore the purple of his office with the ease of a man born to silk, though rumor whispered he'd begun life as the third son of a Rhineland baron. A pectoral cross of heavy silver hung against his chest, and his fingers, long and deliberate, carried a single ring set with a garnet that caught the candlelight like a drop of blood suspended in glass. "You are not from Aachen," Fulcrad observed. "No, from the south then, from the war." It wasn't a question. "I have heard many confessions these past months. Soldiers returning from Hispania, men who rode with the king." He paused. "Men who rode with the rearguard." Bertrard's hands tightened on the rail until the knuckles went white. "I was at Roncevaux," he said. The name dropped between them like a stone into still water. Fulcrad did not speak. He waited, and his silence was a kind of pressure, a thumbscrew of patience. 15 days ago," Bertrard continued. 15 days since the pass. I've walked, I couldn't ride. Every horse shied when I came near, as if they could smell it on me." He drew a breath that caught in his chest. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned grievously. I have the words splintered. I fled when the horns called for courage. My hands are stained with the blood of brothers I left to die." The confession spilled out then, broken and ugly. He told Fulcrad everything. The rear guard of 20,000 strung out through the mountain pass, the wagons heavy with treasure from the Spanish campaign, the sudden shriek of Basque horns in the twilight, the rocks that came first, boulders loosed from the heights, crushing men and horses before they could form ranks, the arrows that followed invisible until they sprouted from shields, from throats. Roland had blown the oliphant. Bertrard described the sound, how it rolled through the valley like the voice of God pronouncing doom, and how he, Bertrard, had turned his horse and fled. "I heard my brother call my name," he whispered. "Odo. He was 22. He'd only taken his spurs that spring. He was pinned beneath his horse, and he called for me, and I." His voice broke. "I spurred faster. I rode over the bodies of men I'd eaten with, prayed with, fought beside for 10 years. I rode until the horns faded behind me, and then I kept riding." The bishop's expression did not change. His amber eyes remained fixed on Bertrard's face, with the steady intensity of a hawk watching something struggle in the grass. "It is a heavy burden you carry," Fulcrad said at last. "The sin of cowardice, the abandonment of kin, the blood of brothers crying out from the ground." He made a small, precise gesture with his ringed hand. "The prescribed penance for such sins is not light. pilgrimage, fasting, years of prayer and mortification. He let the silence finish the thought. I know, Bertrard's voice was barely audible. I know what I deserve, do you? Fulcrad stepped closer, close enough that the scent of myrrh from his vestments cut through the reek of the road. Do you truly understand what awaits a soul stained as yours? The flames of purification, the weight of judgment. Your brother's face always and forever turned away from you in the halls of the blessed. Bertrard's jaw trembled. Tell me what to do, I'll do it. Anything. The bishop studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he smiled, not with his mouth, but with his eyes, a subtle warming that suggested a door opening where none had been visible before. The Lord's mercy is boundless, my son, provided you serve his instrument on earth. Are you prepared to atone? Yes, I swear it. Then listen carefully. Fulcrad moved to stand before the altar, his silhouette cutting across the hanging crucifix. There is a relic, lost these many centuries, hidden in the mountains where your brothers fell, the crown of Judas. Bertrard looked up sharply. The crown of hear me. When Judas Iscariot hanged himself in the potter's field, the priests took the 30 pieces of silver and commissioned a crown. Not a crown of honor, but of shame, a circlet of twisted black iron and tarnished silver, forged from the very coins that bought the Saviour's blood. It was meant to mark the betrayer's grave, a warning for all ages. But it was stolen, carried westward by a penitent who believed the relic held the power to cleanse even the deepest sin. The crown vanished into the passes of the Pyrenees during the Saracen invasions. It has not been seen in 200 years. A crown, Bertrard repeated, forged from Judas's silver, forged from betrayal itself, and yet, Fulcrad's voice dropped, became almost tender. What greater power could there be for a man bearing your burden? To wear the crown of Judas is to look your sin in the face. To carry it to a consecrated altar is to receive absolution that no earthly authority can grant. The blood of your brother, the stain of Roncevaux, all of it washed clean. Bertrard's mind churned. He had heard stories of relics, bones of saints that healed the sick, fragments of the true cross that routed armies, but this was something darker, something that matched the darkness he carried inside his own chest. Why are you telling me this? He asked. You could send anyone, a company of knights, men who didn't flee. Knights would ask questions. Knights would demand proof, documentation, the approval of the king. Fulcrad's tone sharpened almost imperceptibly. You will ask nothing, because you have nothing left to lose. You are a dead man walking, Bertrard of the rearguard. The only life you have now is the one this quest gives you. The truth of it hit him like a mailed fist. He had no home to return to, no lord who would claim him, no brother waiting with a forgiving embrace. There was only the road behind him, paved with the dead, and whatever road lay ahead. I don't know the mountains, Bertrard said. I was only there once, and I was running. You will have a guide, a woman of the passes. She is, Fulcrad hesitated, choosing his words, reluctant, but she knows the old paths. She knows where the stories place the crown. You need only follow where she leads. And if she refuses, Captain Serlo will ensure her cooperation. The bishop said the name with the casual confidence of a man accustomed to being obeyed. He commands my household guard. He will accompany you to the foothills and secure the guide. After that, she will understand that her freedom depends on your success. Bertrard felt the weight of it, settling around him, binding him, dragging him forward. It was not hope. Hope was too clean a word for what stirred in his chest. It was obligation, a debt he could finally begin to repay. I'll find it, he said. The crown, I'll bring it back, of course you will. Fulcrad extended his hand, the garnet ring glinting. Swear it. Bertrard grasped the ring. The metal was cold, the stone colder. Before God and his saints, I swear, I will retrieve the crown of Judas. I will carry it to this altar. And I will be clean, rise, my son. Fulcrad withdrew his hand and sketched the sign of the cross in the air between them. Go in the peace of Christ. Captain Serlo awaits you in the courtyard with horses and provisions. Bertrard rose. His knees ached from the stone, but the pain felt like the beginning of something rather than the end. He turned and walked back down the nave, past the staring worshippers, past the deacon who pressed himself against a pillar to avoid contact. The bronze doors swung open and morning light flooded in, blinding him. Behind him, in the shadows of the side chapel, Bishop Fulcrad watched him go. The smile that had warmed his eyes was gone now, replaced by something harder, sharper. He reached into his vestments and withdrew a small parchment, folded and sealed with crimson wax. The seal bore no cross, no episcopal insignia. It bore a single symbol, a serpent, coiled around a crown. He broke the seal and read the message within for the third time that morning. The words were in a cipher known only to 3 men in the kingdom of the Franks, and they confirmed what his agents in the south had reported. The crown of Judas was no mere legend. It had been found, unearthed by peasants in a Pyrenean village, and its power was real. Not the power to absolve sin, that was a fiction Fulcrad had crafted for desperate penitence, but a power far more useful. A power that could bend the will of kings. Charlemagne was aging. His empire was fragile, held together by one man's iron grip. And in the mountains, a relic waited that could reshape the succession itself. Fulcrad tucked the parchment away and folded his hands within his sleeves. Let the broken soldier chase his redemption. Let him brave the passes and the Basques and whatever else the mountains held. He would find the crown because his need was absolute. And when he returned, Bishop Fulcrad would be waiting to take it from him. The courtyard of the Palatine chapel lay grey and cold beneath a sky, the colour of hammered lead. Bertrard stepped out from the side door and stood for a moment, blinking in the thin morning light. The fever sweat of confession still clung to his skin, and the garnet on Bishop Fulcrad's ring seemed to burn behind his eyes like an ember he could not look away from. A man was waiting by the mounting block. He was not tall, but he carried himself with the compact stillness of someone who had learned patience through violence. His hair was cropped close to the skull, the colour of seasoned oak, and a scar divided his left eyebrow into two crooked halves. His eyes, when they found Bertrard, were the pale blue of winter ice, and just as warm. He wore a captain's baldric over a mail shirt that had been recently oiled but bore the tiny nicks and scratches of long use. "You're the penitent," the man said. It was not a question. "I am Captain Serlo. His Excellency has commanded I escort you south and secure a guide. Horses are saddled, provisions for 12 days. Bertrard looked at the horses, 2 sturdy palfreys and a pack mule, and felt the weight of his own emptiness. He carried nothing, no sword, no shield, not even a pilgrim's staff. His hands hung at his sides, open and useless. The scar from temple to cheekbone pulled tight as he frowned. "I fled when the horns called for courage," he said quietly. "My hands are stained with the blood of brothers I left to die. I am not a man who deserves an escort." Serlo's expression did not change. "My Lord Fulcrad speaks with the voice of the Almighty. Question him, and you question God. Mount up." They rode south for 6 days, the road unwound beneath them like a bandage peeled from a wound that would not heal. The flat plains of the Rhineland gave way to rolling hills, then to the first sharp ridges of the Pyrenean foothills. Each night Bertrard slept on the hard ground and dreamed of Odo pinned beneath his horse, the animal screaming, Odo reaching out with a hand that would never close around his brother's. Each morning he woke with the taste of iron in his mouth and said nothing. Serlo spoke little. He was a man who used words the way a miser uses coin, and when he did speak, it was to give orders or to pray the hours in a flat, mechanical voice that suggested devotion had long ago hardened into habit. He watched Bertrard constantly, and his hand never strayed far from the sword at his hip. On the 7th day they entered the mountains proper. The road narrowed to a track that clung to the sides of the passes like a scar. Pine and thorn scrub clawed at the rocks. The air thinned and grew sharp with the scent of snowmelt and wild thyme. Somewhere above them, an eagle turned slow circles in the white sky. It was there, in a hollow where the track bent around an outcropping of grey stone, that Bertrard heard the sounds of struggle, a woman's voice, sharp and furious, cursing in a language that was not Frankish. The clash of iron on rock, men laughing. Bertrard was off his horse before he knew he had moved. His legs, hollowed by weeks of walking and fasting, carried him forward with a speed that surprised him. He rounded the outcropping and saw them. 3 men in rough leather and rusted mail, bandits by the look of their patched gear and hungry faces. They had cornered a woman against the rock face. She was slight and dark, with black hair pulled into a thick braid that fell over one shoulder, and her skin was the deep weathered brown of someone who had spent her life under the mountain sun. Her eyes, black as river stones, held no fear, only a fierce, defiant anger. She gripped a staff of twisted juniper in both hands, and at her feet lay a spilled basket of herbs and roots, the sharp green scent of crushed rosemary rising from the trampled leaves. One of the bandits lunged. She brought the staff around in a swift arc that caught him across the temple, but the second man seized her braid and yanked her backward. Her feet skidded on the loose scree. Bertrard did not think. He did not pray. He simply moved, as if his body remembered something his soul had tried to forget. He caught the second bandit by the collar and drove his fist into the man's jaw, once, twice, until the grip on the woman's hair loosened and the bandit staggered. The third man turned with a blade already drawn, a short, ugly seax that gleamed with old rust. Bertrard had no weapon. He raised his forearm to block and felt the blade bite deep into the flesh below his elbow. A line of white fire that opened from wrist to mid-arm. The bandit grinned and raised the seax for a finishing blow. The woman's staff caught him across the back of the skull with a sound like a mallet striking oak. He dropped, senseless. The first bandit, bleeding from his temple, scrambled to his feet and fled down the slope, his companions dragging themselves after him. Silence fell. The eagle still circled above. The blood from Bertrard's arm dripped onto the stones with a soft, steady sound. The woman lowered her staff. Her chest rose and fell with quick breaths, but her voice was steady when she spoke. You Franks come with swords and prayers, but the mountains remember every oath broken. Why should I thank you? Bertrard pressed his good hand over the wound. The blood was hot against his fingers. I have no sword, he said, and I am done with prayers that go unanswered. She looked at him for a long moment, her dark eyes moving from his face to his arm to the remnants of Frankish armor that still showed beneath his travel-worn cloak. The iron buckle, the reinforced shoulder piece. Something flickered in her expression. Not trust, recognition. You are bleeding, she said. My hut is not far, come. Her name was Alena, and her hut was a small stone dwelling tucked into a fold of the mountain where a spring broke from the rock and ran silver over moss-dark stones. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the rafters, lavender, sage, yarrow, and plants Bertrard did not recognize. A small fire burned in a hearth of river stones, and the air was thick with the bitter-sweet smell of mountain medicines. She sat him on a stool and cut away his sleeve with a small knife, her movements quick and sure. The wound was deep but clean. She washed it with water from the spring, then packed it with a paste of crushed yarrow and something resinous that stung and numbed in equal measure. Her hands were steady, and she did not speak as she worked. When she was finished, she bound his arm with strips of clean linen and finally stepped back, her eyes, dark and unreadable, fixed on the iron buckle of his Frankish gear. You were at Roncevaux, she said. It was not a question. Bertrard looked away. The firelight played over the hollows of his face. I was, my people remember Roncevaux. Her voice was flat, controlled, but beneath it ran a current of old anger. The great Charlemagne came with 20,000 men to put a Christian king on a Basque throne. He tore down our walls, burned our villages, and blessed the slaughter in the name of his God. My uncle led the warriors who answered him at the pass. She paused. I am Alena, daughter of the mountain. Lupus of Gascony is my kinsman. Bertrard closed his eyes. The name landed like a fist. Lupus, the Basque leader, the architect of the ambush, the man who had killed 20,000 Franks with boulders and arrows and war cries in the narrow pass, the man who had, in a roundabout way, killed Odo. I am not your enemy, Bertrard said, and the words felt thin and useless. Then why are you here? Alena demanded. Why does a Frankish knight who carries no sword wander into my mountains bleeding and desperate? What do you seek? He opened his eyes. The grey of them, hammered lead in the firelight, met her black ones, the Crown of Judas, a circlet of twisted iron and tarnished silver, forged from the 30 pieces. Your people unearthed it. I was told it can absolve the sin of betrayal. Alena was silent for a long moment. Then she laughed, a short, bitter sound with no warmth in it. Absolve? She shook her head. You Franks will believe anything a priest tells you. The crown is no holy relic. It is cursed. Every hand that has touched it has brought ruin on their own house. It does not absolve betrayal. It breeds it. It was made to mark the grave of the betrayer, and his sin clings to it like rot to dead wood. Whatever bishop sent you here lied. The words settled into Bertrard's chest like stones dropped into deep water. He thought of Fulcrad's amber eyes, his parchment skin, the garnet ring catching the candlelight, the cipher, folded and sealed, known only to 3 men in the kingdom. Why would he lie? Power, Alena said simply. What else? A crown that controls kings. What man would not want such a thing? Before Bertrard could answer, a sound cut through the stillness outside. The jingle of harness, the clink of mail, the heavy tread of men who were not trying to hide their approach. A voice, cold and familiar, rang out against the stone walls of the hut. Bertrard, son of the rearguard, I know you are within. Come out and bring the woman. Surlo, Alena moved fast. She swept the herbs from the table, revealing a trapdoor set into the stone floor, a thing Bertrard had not seen hidden beneath a woven rug. She pulled it open. Below, darkness yawned, and the sound of running water echoed up from unseen depths. A stream channel, she whispered. It leads to a cave on the far side of the ridge. Go. You will come with me, Bertrard said. She hesitated. Outside, Surlo's voice came again, harder now. The bishop's patience is not endless. Surrender the woman and you may yet complete your penance. The bishop's penance is a lie, Alena hissed. You heard what I told you. That crown will not save your soul. I know. Bertrard met her eyes. But I swore an oath on his ring. If I break it, I am no better than the coward who fled the pass. Help me find the crown, not for absolution, but to keep it from Fulcrad's hands. Help me undo what I have set in motion. A fist hammered against the door. The wood shuddered. Alena looked at the door, then at the trapdoor, then at the grey-eyed Frankish knight who had thrown himself unarmed at 3 bandits to save a woman he did not know. Something shifted in her face, the hard line of her mouth softening, just slightly. "The mountains remember," she said, "but they also judge. Very well. I will guide you to the hiding place. But when this is done, you will answer for what your people did here, Frank." "I will answer for more than that," Bertrard said. She dropped into the darkness first, her braid swinging, and he followed. The trapdoor closed above them just as the door of the hut splintered inward and the cold voice of Captain Serlo filled the small stone room. The stream was icy and fast, and it carried them deep into the mountain's dark heart, leaving behind only the trampled rosemary and the blood drying on the stones. The water was the first thing Bertrard knew, a steady, seeping cold that climbed past his ankles and numbed the wound beneath the bandage until it was only a dull, distant ache. The stream channel was narrower than he had guessed from the glimpse he'd caught before dropping through the trapdoor. A cleft in the mountain's bones, barely wide enough for his shoulders. The walls slick with moss that glowed faintly green where thin roots broke through from the world above. Alena moved ahead of him with the sure-footed silence of someone who had known this dark since childhood, her juniper staff probing the unseen floor, the water breaking around her legs in quiet ripples. "How far?" he asked. His voice came out raw, flattened by the stone. "Far enough that Serlo will not follow," she said without turning. "My people dug this channel before the Franks first crossed the mountains. It feeds a cave where we can breathe." He did not answer. His left arm throbbed with each step and the darkness pressed against his eyes like a hand. He thought of Odo, not the way he usually did, not the pinned body or the screaming, but earlier, in the sunlight before the pass, when his brother had bent to tighten a strap on his greave and looked up grinning. "You walk too slow, Bert. The king will have conquered the moon before we reach Spain a lifetime ago. 22 days. Both things seemed true. The channel bent sharply left, then widened. Bertrard felt the air change against his face, less close, carrying a faint mineral dryness. Alena's staff scraped stone, and then her hand found his wrist in the dark, guiding him upward onto a shelf of rock. He climbed awkwardly, one-handed, the wet cloak dragging at his shoulders, until he knelt on dry ground and could see at last the faintest smear of grey light filtering from somewhere high above. They were in a cavern, not large but tall, its ceiling lost in shadow. The stream ran along one wall and vanished under an overhang. A scatter of old ash marked a fire pit near the center, ringed with stones blackened by long use. Alena was already crouched there, striking flint against a shard of iron until the sparks caught in a nest of dried moss. The flame rose, small and wavering, and it caught the planes of her face, the high cheekbones, the eyes black as riverstones, the thick braid heavy with water from the channel. "Sit," she said. "Your arm will need fresh packing before we go further." He sat across the fire from her, his back against the cavern wall. The stone was cold but solid, and after the channel's grip, solidity was a kind of mercy. Alena worked in silence, unwinding the sodden linen, probing the edges of the gash with fingers that were surprisingly gentle. The wound was an angry red, but the flesh had not blackened, and no foul smell rose from it. "You were lucky," she said. "The Sikhs was dirty, but the yarrow held. Another day and you might have lost the arm." She reached into the pouch at her belt and drew out a folded leaf packed with the same resinous paste. "Tell me, Frank, what did your bishop say when he sent you to find this crown?" Bertrard watched her spread the paste along the wound. The firelight made her movements seem ritualistic ancient. "He said it would absolve me, that the crown was a holy relic, forged from the betrayal silver, blessed by Christ's mercy. That if I brought it back, my sins would be lifted. And you believed him?" "I wanted to." She wrapped the arm with fresh linen, pulling the strips tight enough that he drew a sharp breath through his teeth. "Wanting is not believing. You knew in your gut it was a lie, but you came anyway. That makes you either a fool or something worse. Which do you think?" She tied off the bandage and sat back on her heels, her gaze steady across the small fire. "I think you are a man who fled when the horns called for courage. I think your hands are stained with the blood of brothers you left to die, and I think you came here hoping the mountains would swallow you before you had to face what that means." She paused. "I think I know that man. I buried his brother." The words landed like stones dropped into deep water, and for a long moment there was only the crackle of the fire and the distant trickle of the stream. "Your brother," Bertrard said. "Mikel." The name came out of her like a blade drawn from a wound. "He was younger than me by 3 summers, a shepherd mostly. He roamed the high pastures with a sling and a reed pipe, and the eagles knew him well enough to circle close. When the old cave was uncovered, The one your priests call the hiding place of the crown. It was Michael who found it. A rockfall after the spring thaw opened a fissure he had never seen before. He went inside. He came out carrying something wrapped in a rotting cloth. She picked up a twig and stirred the fire, sending sparks spiraling upward. It was a circlet of twisted black iron and tarnished silver. 30 pieces, so they say, melted and hammered into a crown. It should have been beautiful, but it was not. It was ugly in a way that made the eyes want to look away and could not. Then the bishop's men came, Bertrard said quietly. Not Serlo, others before him. They wore no badges, but they spoke Fulcrad's words and carried his seal, a serpent coiled around a crown. They came to our village with swords and prayers, and they asked about the cave. Miquel would not speak. He knew what they wanted, and he knew nothing good follows a Frank who prays while his hand rests on a sword hilt. Her voice did not waver, but something behind it did, something old and deep and still raw. They took him up to the high pasture where the eagles fly. They kept him there for 3 days. When they brought him back down, he told them where the cave was. Then he died. Bertrard said nothing. There was nothing to say. He had seen what men did when they believed God was on their side. The crown's story is older than your Christ, Alena continued, her voice hardening. It began with Judas, yes, the silver he took, the silver he tried to give back, the silver the priests would not accept because it was blood money. They used it to buy a potter's field, a place to bury strangers, but that is not where it ended. A Roman governor named Macedonius heard the tale 100 years later and grew curious. He dug up the field, searched the graves, and found the silver scattered among the bones, still bright, still untarnished. He had it melted down and forged into a coronet, thinking it would make him a king. Within a year he had murdered his wife, his son, and his closest friend. His own guards cut him down in the bathhouse. The coronet passed to a senator in Ravenna, who strangled his brother for a province, then to a general who burned his own city to the ground rather than surrender it. 3 emperors wore it in the centuries that followed. Each one's reign ended in blood and madness, and the chroniclers wrote only that the gods had turned their faces away. She tossed the twig into the flames. A penitent stole it from the last emperor's tomb. Some say he was a monk, some say a thief who found faith too late. He brought it into these mountains and buried it in a cave and sealed the entrance with a stone carved with a cross. He thought he was hiding sin where no one would find it. But the mountains remember every oath broken, Frank. The mountains do not forget. Bertrard's arm was throbbing again, but the pain felt distant now, muffled by the weight of what she was telling him. He tried to piece it together in his mind. The serpent seal, the cipher known only to 3 men, Fulcrad's amber eyes gleaming above the garnet ring as he spoke of absolution. The bishop did not want a relic, he wanted a weapon. Fulcrad means to give the crown to Charlemagne, he said slowly, or to whoever sits the throne after him. A king wearing that crown would fall to madness, and the bishop would be there to guide him, to speak with God's voice while the king lost his own. Alena met his eyes. You Franks come with swords and prayers, but your bishop does not merely want to rule. He wants to be the power behind the throne while the throne devours whoever sits upon it. Charlemagne is old, his sons are weak. A cursed king is a puppet king, and a puppet king needs a puppeteer. And my oath, Bertrard said, the words bitter on his tongue. I swore on his ring. I swore I would retrieve the crown and bring it to him. Then your oath was forged on a lie, and the God I do not worship would not hold you to it. He looked down at his hands. The left was bandaged, the right was empty. He had not carried a sword since Roncevaux, had not felt worthy of steel in his grip. But this was not a fight for swords. It was a fight for something smaller and harder, a truth he had been running from since the pass. He thought of Odo, pinned beneath the horse, the Basques swarming down the mountainside, the horns calling for a stand that would not come. He had fled then. He had run while his brother screamed his name, and he had not stopped running until the sound was swallowed by the roar of his own blood. He had walked for 15 days through country that hated him, carrying nothing but guilt and the faint, desperate hope that somewhere there was a magic that could wash the stain away. There was no magic. There was only a twisted thing of iron and silver hidden in a cave, and a bishop who meant to use it to break a kingdom. I fled when the horns called for courage, Bertrard said. His voice was very quiet, but it did not waver. My hands are stained with the blood of brothers I left to die. That will not change, no matter how far I walk or what I carry back. But I will not carry this. He raised his eyes to Alena. I will help you destroy it. She studied him for a long moment, the firelight dancing in the black of her eyes. Then she nodded once, a short, sharp movement like a blade being sheathed. Good, she said, because the cave where Michael found the crown is still guarded, not by men, The bishop's soldiers killed each other fighting over the spoil, as the curse demands. But by what they left behind, bones, shadows, grief. You will need more than a bandaged arm to walk in there and come out whole. She rose, brushing ash from her knees, and held out her hand. But I will guide you, not for your absolution, for my brother. Bertrard took her hand and let her pull him to his feet. The fire guttered and spat, and somewhere in the dark above them, a draught of mountain air stirred the stale cavern breath. Then we go, he said, before Serlo finds another way through. At the far end of the cavern, the stream vanished into a low arch of stone. Alena lifted her staff and pointed toward it, and the flame at their feet shrank to embers as they walked into the dark. The stone arch narrowed to a cleft that breathed cold air like the exhalation of something buried. Bertrard had to turn sideways, his injured arm pressed tight against his ribs, the bandage catching on the rough wall. Alena moved ahead of him with the ease of smoke, her juniper staff tapping a rhythm only she understood. The darkness here was not the simple absence of light, but a thickening, a pressure that seemed to push against his chest with every step. It opens ahead, she said, her voice small against the stone. The stream runs through it. You will hear the water before you see the light. Bertrard could already hear it. A low, steady murmur that rose and fell like voices in another room. The sound pulled at something in him, a memory he had been fighting since they entered the mountain. He closed his eyes for a moment and saw Odo's face, streaked with mud and blood, his mouth forming words that the roar of falling boulders had devoured. 15 days of walking, he had counted each one, the guilt settling deeper into his bones with every mile. 15 days, and still he could not remember what Odo had tried to tell him, only the shape of the words, only the way his brother's hand had reached for him before the rocks came down. Bertrard. Alena's voice pulled him back. She had stopped at the edge of the cleft, her slight frame silhouetted against a wash of grey light. He could just make out the twist of her thick black braid, the set of her shoulders under the rough wool of her tunic. Her black eyes, dark as river stones, watched him with something that was not quite patience. "You were not here," she said. "You were on the pass again. I am here now." She studied him a moment longer, then turned and stepped through the opening. Bertrard followed. The cavern opened around them like a wound in the mountain's belly. The stream they had been following spilled from a fissure in the far wall and pooled in a black basin before disappearing under a tumble of fallen rock. High above, a crack in the ceiling let in a shaft of late afternoon light, pale and thin as watered milk, catching on the mist that rose from the water. The walls were wet with condensation, gleaming like the inside of a living throat. But it was not the water or the light that stopped Bertrard at the threshold. It was the weight. The air here was heavy in a way that had nothing to do with damp or depth. It pressed against his skin like a held breath, like the moment before a blow falls. His injured arm throbbed, a dull heat pulsing under the linen bandage, and for an instant he felt something turn over in his stomach, nausea but recognition. He had felt this before, at Roncevaux, in the silence after the horns stopped blowing, when the pass was full of bodies and the crows had not yet come. "The Guardians," Alena said quietly. She had stopped a few paces ahead, her staff planted firmly on the stone. "The ones who died here, they are still watching." Bertrard stepped forward, and the feeling intensified. A prickle at the back of his neck, a whisper at the edge of hearing. The cavern stretched deeper than the light could reach, and somewhere in that darkness something gleamed. He saw it then. A raised shelf of stone at the far end of the cavern, shaped almost like an altar, and on it a circlet of twisted black iron and tarnished silver, ugly in a way that made the eyes want to look away and could not. The Crown of Judas, the 30 pieces, melted and beaten into a thing that seemed to drink the light rather than reflect it. The whispers began. They were not words, not at first, just a susurration, a rustling like dry leaves or the drag of a body over stone. But as Bertrard drew closer, they sharpened into something almost like speech, a murmur of old grievances, old betrayals. He caught a name, Macedonius another, Galerius a third that sounded like a woman weeping. "It knows we are here," Alena said. Her voice was steady, but her knuckles were white on the staff. "It remembers every hand that has touched it, every hand it has ruined." Bertrard stopped at the edge of the stone shelf. The circlet was smaller than he had imagined, thin and misshapen, the silver dulled to the color of old pewter. It should have been nothing. It should have been a trinket a beggar would scorn. But looking at it, he felt the same sickness he had felt in Bishop Fulcrad's chapel, kneeling before a man whose amber eyes held nothing but the calculation of power. "I fled when the horns called for courage," he said, the words coming unbidden. "My hands are stained with the blood of brothers I left to die. I thought this thing could absolve me." Alena looked at him, and there was no pity in her face, only a hard understanding. Wanting is not believing, you know that now. He reached for the crown. Don't! A voice from behind them, cold and familiar as a blade in the dark. Bertrard spun, his hand falling to where his sword would have hung. But he had worn no sword since Aachen, had come as a pilgrim, a penitent, and now he was unarmed. Captain Serlo stepped from the cleft in the cavern wall, his compact frame filling the narrow passage. His cropped hair, the color of seasoned oak, was damp with the cavern's moisture, and the scar through his left eyebrow stood pale against his weathered skin. Behind him, 4 men in mail pushed through the opening, their swords already drawn, their faces hard with the disciplined cruelty of household guards. The pale blue of Serlo's eyes, cold as winter ice, found Bertrard and held. You led us here after all, pilgrim. Serlo's mouth curved into something that was not a smile. The bishop will be pleased. Bertrard moved without thinking, putting himself between the soldiers and the crown, between the soldiers and Alena. You followed us through the stream. The stream led to the mountain's flank. We found the cleft an hour ago. You were not as quiet as you believed. Serlo gestured, and 2 of his men fanned out to either side, their boots scraping on the wet stone. Step away from the relic. Fulcrad wants it whole, and he wants the woman alive. He did not specify. Alena raised her staff, the juniper wood gleaming dully in the weak light. You Franks come with swords and prayers, but the mountains remember every oath broken. The mountains are stone and silence, Serlo said. They remember nothing. The first guard lunged at Bertrard, a stocky man with a shaved head and a sword that looked too heavy for his grip. Bertrard sidestepped, caught the man's wrist, and drove his knee into the guard's midsection. The man folded with a grunt, but the second was already on him, and Bertrard had to throw himself backward, his injured arm screaming as he landed hard on the stone floor. Alena swung her staff in a wide arc, catching a third guard across the face. He staggered, blood streaming from his nose, but the 4th man was behind her before she could recover, his arm locking around her throat, his sword pressing flat against her stomach. Enough. Serlo's voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. He had not moved from his place by the cleft. He had not needed to. The next man who moves, the woman dies. Slowly, Bertrard froze, one hand braced against the stone floor, the other still clutching his injured arm. The guard he had kneed was rising unsteadily, his face twisted with anger. The one Alena had struck was wiping blood from his mouth. And Alena was rigid in her captor's grip, the sword tip dimpling the rough wool of her tunic, her black eyes fixed on Bertrard with an expression he could not read. Good! Serlo walked forward, his boots clicking softly on the wet stone. He stooped and picked up Alena's fallen staff, examined it briefly, then cast it aside. It clattered against the cavern wall and rolled into the darkness. You have caused me a great deal of trouble, Bertrard. The bishop expected you to retrieve the crown and return to Aachen like a good penitent. He did not expect you to develop a conscience. Fulcrad lied to me. Bertrard's voice was raw, scraped thin by the cavern's weight. The crown does not absolve, it corrupts. It destroys everyone who touches it. Yes. Serlo stopped at the stone shelf, looking down at the circlet with an expression of mild distaste. That is rather the point. He reached down and, with the casualness of a man picking up a dropped coin, lifted the crown. The whispers in the cavern rose to a shriek. Bertrard felt it in his teeth, in the marrow of his bones, a sound like metal tearing, like a voice that had been screaming for centuries and would never stop. Serlo's face flickered, just for an instant, and something moved behind his pale eyes. Then it was gone, and he was smiling again, turning the crown over in his hands like a merchant appraising goods. My Lord Fulcrad speaks with the voice of the Almighty, Serlo said, and there was no irony in his tone, no doubt. Question him, and you question God. He has known the crown's true nature since before you set foot in his chapel. He has known what it does to kings. Charlemagne's grip on the empire is failing. You have seen it, I have seen it, every man with eyes has seen it. When he dies, his sons will tear the kingdom apart, unless a new king rises. A king who can be guided, a puppet, Bertrard said. A madman wearing a crown that eats his mind while Fulcrad pulls the strings. A king anointed by heaven and advised by the church. Serlo tucked the crown into a leather pouch at his belt, and the shrieking whispers dimmed to a low, keening hum. Theology is a matter of perspective. You, of course, will not be alive to debate it. He nodded to the guard with the shaved head. The man drew his sword and stepped toward Bertrard. Wait. Alena's voice was steady, though the guard's arm was still tight around her throat. You need me to guide you out of these mountains. The passes are treacherous, and the Basques watch the roads. You will not reach Aachen without me. Serlo considered her. A fair point. But what do you offer in exchange for his life? Take me as your guide. Let him go. The woman has a generous heart. Serlo's smile sharpened. No, I have a better arrangement. You will guide us, yes, but Bertrard will come with us as well, in chains. And if you attempt to lead us astray, if you so much as look at a path I do not like, I will cut pieces from him until you reconsider. Do you understand? Alena's eyes met Bertrard's. He saw the calculation there, the weighing of options, and something else, a grief that was not for him, not yet for Michael, for all the deaths this crown had already caused. I understand, she said. Excellent. Serlo gestured to his men. Bind the pilgrim. We ride for Aachen tonight. The bishop has waited long enough. The guards hauled Bertrard to his feet, and he did not resist. There was no point. His injured arm pulsed with a dull, wet heat, and he could feel the bandage growing sticky beneath his sleeve. Alena's captor released her with a shove, and she stumbled, catching herself on the stone shelf where the crown had rested. For a moment she and Bertrard were close enough to touch, her black eyes dark and unreadable as river stones held his. We will find another way, she said, so low that only he could hear. Then the guards pulled them apart, and the cavern swallowed the words. Behind them, in the darkness beyond the cleft, the bones of Fulcrad's dead men lay silent, their grief still heavy in the air, and the crown whispered from its leather pouch the names of every soul it had destroyed. Serlo's boots beat a steady rhythm on the stone, and the stream ran on, indifferent, carrying nothing but water into the mountain's deep and silent heart. The cold air hit Bertrard's face as they emerged from the cave mouth, clean, sharp with pine resin and the first bite of mountain dusk. It was the first air in hours that had not tasted of old stone and older grief. He filled his lungs with it, even as the rope at his wrists bit deeper, and the guard behind him shoved him forward with a mailed hand. Captain Serlo emerged last, ducking under the low lintel of the cavern's entrance. The leather pouch at his belt swung against his thigh with each step. Bertrard's eyes went to it without meaning to. Even now, in the fading light, the thing seemed to pull at the edges of his vision like a weight on a rope. The crown, wrapped in darkness and hide, still whispered. He could not hear the words, but he could feel them, a low vibration that sat behind his teeth and hummed along the bones of his jaw. Get them on horses, Serlo said. His 4 guards were already untying the palfrey and the pack mule from where they'd been tethered among the rocks. The horses stamped and blew steam into the cooling air. The girl rides bound at the front with me. The pilgrim rides double with Giselher. If he so much as twitches Giselher, you open his good arm to the bone. Giselher, a broad man with a neck like a bull's and a mouth permanently twisted into something between a sneer and a scowl, grunted his understanding and hauled Bertrard toward his mount. Alena was already being lifted onto the palfrey by another guard. Her hands were bound behind her, and her thick black braid had come half undone, the loose strands clinging to the weathered brown skin of her cheek. She did not struggle. Her black eyes, dark as river stones, found Bertrard's for the briefest moment. He read nothing in them but a warning. Wait! Serlo swung into his own saddle, the palfrey dancing sideways before he brought it under control with a hard jerk of the reins. The captain's scar pulled white across his left eyebrow in the half-light, and his pale blue eyes swept the tree line with the cold precision of winter ice. The pilgrim swore an oath on my lord's own ring to retrieve the holy relic, he said, loud enough for all to hear. His voice carried the particular flatness of a man who has never questioned an order in his life. Now he conspires with a mountain witch to destroy it. Let him be a lesson, lads. The road to Aachen is long, and I want no more betrayals before we reach the bishop. Ride. They rode. The first day passed in a blur of pine and shale, the path winding down from the high passes into the steep valleys below. The guard Giselher rode with one hand on the reins and the other clamped around Bertrard's bruised ribs, and the jolting of the horse sent fresh waves of pain through the deep cut on his forearm. He could feel the bandages beneath his sleeve, the linen still holding where Alena had wrapped them in the cavern. His grey eyes, the colour of hammered lead, stayed fixed on the leather pouch at Serlo's belt. It never stopped humming. He was beginning to wonder if it ever would. By the time Serlo called a halt for the night, they had descended into a narrow gorge where the stream they'd followed underground emerged into the open air. The guards built a fire. Alena was tied to a pine trunk at the edge of the camp. Bertrard was left propped against a boulder, his wrists still bound, while Giselher crouched nearby and chewed a strip of dried meat. It was Giselher who gave Bertrard his opening. The guard was younger than the others, maybe 18, with a soft chin and the kind of restless unease that came from too many nights sleeping near things that whispered in the dark. Every time the fire popped, he twitched. Every time the shadows shifted, his hand went to his sword hilt. And his eyes, Bertrard noticed, kept drifting to the pouch at Serlo's belt. You hear it too, Bertrard said. Low enough that only Giselher could hear, the guard's head snapped around. "Shut your mouth. I'm not mocking you. I hear it. Hasn't stopped since the cave. Like something scraping at the inside of your skull." Bertrard leaned his head back against the boulder, letting exhaustion slacken his face. Serlo touched it. He opened the pouch. "You saw him, and now you lie awake wondering when the curse will find its way to you." Giselher's jaw worked. "It's a holy relic. It's a crown forged from 30 pieces of silver paid to a traitor. Every man who ever wore it died in blood and madness. Every house that touched it fell to ruin. You think you're safe because you only carried the man who carries it." Bertrard let the question hang. "Ask Serlo why Fulcrad didn't come for it himself. Ask him why he sent men to die in that cave instead of blessing the expedition with his own holy hand." Giselher said nothing, but he did not tell Bertrard to shut his mouth again either. Bertrard shifted, testing the ropes at his wrists. They had been tied by someone who knew knots, probably Serlo himself. But the cold and the damp had swollen the hemp, and the hours of riding had worked the fibers loose. One more inch of give, and he could slip a hand free. He just needed the guard to look away. The fire crackled. In the pouch at Serlo's belt, the crown whispered on. Giselher stood abruptly, walked to the fire, and did not look back. Bertrard's right hand came free. He cut Alena's bonds with Giselher's own knife before the guard even realized it was missing. They slipped into the darkness between the pines, and by the time the alarm rose behind them, Serlo's voice, sharp with fury, shouting orders into the night. They were already mounted on 2 stolen horses and riding hard for the high passes. Alena led. She knew these paths, every hidden track and switchback, every stream channel that cut through the mountains like a secret vein. Behind them the shouts faded, then died. Serlo would follow, but he would follow on the main road, the long way, the way that wound through the valleys and took 6 days to reach the plains. Alena knew a shorter route. 3 days if they rode through the nights. 3 days to Aachen. They did not speak until dawn, when they stopped to water the horses at a creek that ran silver under the rising sun. Alena slid from the saddle and knelt by the water, cupping it to her face. Her hands were still raw from the ropes. Bertrard saw her fingers tremble as she splashed water over her cheeks. "You knew what Serlo was before I did," he said, dismounting beside her. "How? Because I know what Fulcrad's men are." She did not look at him. They came for Mikel the same way. All patience and politeness, and then the knives. Her voice was steady, but he heard the crack beneath it. "That captain of yours will not stop. He believes what he carries is holy. Men who believe that will do anything." Bertrard crouched beside her. The horses drank behind them, their breaths steaming in the cold air. "Then we beat him to Aachen. We stop the bishop before the crown ever touches a king's head." Alena turned to face him then, and in the grey morning light, her black eyes were hard as obsidian. "You cannot simply destroy it, pilgrim. I have thought on this since the cave. My brother told me things before he died. Stories he found carved on the back of the stone that sealed the cavern. Words in Old Basque, older than the Romans." She drew a breath. "The crown feeds on betrayal. It was born from it. The only thing that can break its power is the thing it cannot corrupt. And what is that? A willing death. Someone must wear the crown and die by their own choice, not tricked, not forced, not bargaining for glory, for the sake of another. Only then will the curse shatter." The word settled into Bertrard like a stone dropping into deep water. He thought of Odo, pinned beneath a horse in the pass at Roncevaux, calling his name while the arrows fell. He thought of running. He thought of the 15 days he'd walked afterward, each step heavier than the last. "Then we know what must be done," he said quietly. Alena stared at him. "You would do this?" "I fled when the horns called for courage. My hands are stained with the blood of brothers I left to die." The words came out before he could stop them. The confession he'd made to Fulcrad in the chapel at Aachen, repeated now to a mountain herb woman with the dawn breaking over her shoulders. But this time it was not a plea for absolution. It was a statement of fact. "If the curse requires a death, then mine is already owed." Alena said nothing for a long moment. Then she rose, gathered the reins of her horse, and swung back into the saddle. "We ride," she said. 3 days and 3 nights they rode, pausing only when the horses could go no further, eating dried herbs and bitter roots from Alena's pouch, drinking from streams that ran cold with snowmelt. The hidden path carried them down out of the mountains and onto the rolling plains of Frankish country, past villages where no one looked twice at 2 riders on lathered horses, past fields where the wheat stood golden and ready for harvest. By the evening of the 3rd day, they saw the walls of Aachen rising in the distance, and beyond them, the towers of the royal palace lit with torches and banners. The feast had already begun. They could hear it from half a league away. the distant pulse of drums, the rise and fall of voices lifted in song, the clatter of cups and the braying of horns. The great hall of Charlemagne was blazing with light, and the courtyard before it was thick with horses and wagons and the tents of lords who had come to pay homage. Bertrard and Alena left their exhausted horses at the edge of the encampment. Bertrard's travel-worn cloak, still bearing the iron buckle and reinforced shoulder of his Frankish armor, drew no second glances among the soldiers and servants milling through the outer yards. Alena pulled her dark braid over her shoulder and kept her head down, a slight figure moving like smoke through the chaos. They pushed through the crowd toward the great hall. The doors stood open, spilling golden light and the smell of roast meat into the evening air. And inside at the far end of the hall, Bertrard saw him. Bishop Fulcrad stood before the high table, tall and angular in his dark vestments, his parchment skin stretched thin over prominent bones. The garnet ring on his finger caught the candlelight like a drop of blood suspended in glass. In his hands, raised high above his head, displayed for all the assembled lords to see, was the crown of Judas. The leather pouch lay discarded at his feet. The crown was exactly as Bertrard remembered it from the cavern, a circlet of twisted black iron and tarnished silver, ugly in a way that compelled and repelled, forged from the 30 pieces that had bought a man's soul and then hung him from a tree. It seemed to drink the light rather than reflect it, and even from across the hall, Bertrard could feel its hum pressing against his teeth. Charlemagne sat at the high table, white-bearded and broad-shouldered, watching the bishop with an expression of guarded curiosity. His sons flanked him, the ambitious Louis, the sickly Charles, the boy Lothar who was too young to understand the knives already being sharpened for his future, and around them, the lords of the empire, Austrasians, Neustrians, Lombard counts, Saxon dukes forced into reluctant homage, all of them fixated on the twisted circlet in the bishop's hands. By the grace of Almighty God, Fulcrad's voice rang through the hall resonant and oil-smooth. A holy relic has been delivered to us from the mountains of the south. The crown of the apostle, touched by the passion of our Lord's own betrayer, sanctified by the blood of martyrs. Let the king be crowned anew, anointed by heaven and advised by the church, that his line may endure forever. The lords stirred. Someone began to clap. Charlemagne rose slowly from his seat, his eyes never leaving the crown. Bertrard was already moving. He pushed through the crowd, shouldering past a Saxon nobleman in furs, ducking under the arm of a Lombard count who tried to grab him, his grey eyes fixed on the dark iron circlet that seemed to pulse with every step he took. Alena was somewhere behind him. He could feel her presence like a shadow at his back, but he did not turn to look. "Stop!" His voice cracked across the hall like a whip. "The crown is cursed. Every man who has worn it has died in madness and blood." Fulcrad's amber eyes found him. The bishop's expression did not change, the same patient, paternal smile he had worn in the chapel when Bertrard had knelt before him and sworn the oath that had begun all of this. "Bertrard of the rearguard," he said, lowering the crown but not relinquishing it. "I prayed for your safe return, but the road has clearly addled your wits. Guards, seize this man." Serlo stepped out from behind a pillar, his sword already drawn. He must have ridden through the knights as well, taking the main road at a killing pace, arriving only moments before them. The captain's eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, but his blade was steady. "My lord Fulcrad speaks with the voice of the Almighty. Question him and you question God." Bertrard did not stop walking. He moved past Serlo as if the man were made of air, his gaze locked on Fulcrad, on the crown, on the king who stood so close to damnation. "I failed my brother at Roncevaux," he said, and his voice carried now, reaching the farthest corners of the hall. "I will not fail this kingdom. If someone must die to break this curse, then let it be me." The hall held its breath, 100 candles guttering in the sudden stillness. Bertrard stood before the high table, his travel-worn cloak still bearing the iron buckle of a Frankish soldier, hanging limp with road dust and dried sweat. The bandage on his left forearm showed a dark bloom where the wound beneath had begun to seep again. His grey eyes, the colour of hammered lead, were fixed not on the king, but on the tall, angular figure who held the twisted circlet of black iron and tarnished silver. Bishop Fulcrad's amber gaze was steady as old resin, his parchment skin smooth with a composure that had not wavered since the pilgrim first burst through the doors. He held the crown of Judas before him like a sacred offering, and his heavy silver pectoral cross glinted in the candlelight. Beside him, Captain Serlo stood with sword drawn, his pale blue eyes, cold as winter ice, never leaving Bertrard's face. The scar through his left eyebrow stood pale against his weathered skin. "I fled when the horns called for courage," Bertrard said, his voice carrying to the farthest corners of the hall. The Austrasian lords, the Neustrian counts, the Lombard dukes, all leaned forward. My hands are stained with the blood of brothers I left to die. That guilt is mine, and I will answer for it before God. He took a step forward. Serlo's blade rose. But this bishop's hands are stained with blood he will not confess. Bertrard pointed at the crown. That thing was forged from the silver Judas took to betray our Lord. It has poisoned every house that ever touched it. Fulcrad knows this. He means to set it upon the king's brow, not to honor him, but to unmake him. A murmur rippled through the assembly. Charlemagne, broad-shouldered and white-bearded, sat forward on his throne. His hands, thick and scarred from 50 campaigns, gripped the carved arms. His eyes, a heavy hooded brown that missed nothing, moved from Bertrard to Fulcrad and back. My lord Fulcrad speaks with the voice of the Almighty, Serlo growled. Question him, and you question God. The captain lunged. Bertrard twisted, but the day's ride had left him slow. Serlo's blade opened a gash across his ribs, and he staggered. One hand pressed to the wound. The hall erupted. Lords rose from their benches. Guards rushed forward, then hesitated, unsure whom to seize. Alena darted from the crowd, her black braids swinging, her eyes like river stones fixed on Bertrard. To your left, she cried, but Fulcrad had already turned to the king. The Lord's mercy is boundless, my son, the bishop intoned, and before anyone could stop him, he stepped onto the dais and lowered the crown of Judas onto Charlemagne's head. Provided you serve his instrument on earth. The king's body went rigid. His eyes, which a moment before had been sharp with calculation, filmed over like ice on a winter puddle. A tremor passed through his jaw, and when he spoke, his voice was not his own. It scraped up from some deep place, raw and intimate and terrible. I knew Lothar would betray me before he was weaned, Charlemagne said, and his youngest son went white. I saw the cowardice in his eyes the day he was born. Charles I would have smothered in his crib if his mother had not woken. Louis alone I trusted, and Louis alone I despise. For he is weak, and I am strong, and weakness in a son is an insult to the father. Louis, the eldest, half rose from his seat, his face a mask of shock and humiliation. The hall was silent now, a sickened silence, as the king continued to speak, of secret executions, of land he had stolen from his own nephews, of a girl in Pavia whose husband he had hanged so he might have her for a night. The words came out flat and even, as though the king were reciting a market list, while the crown drank the candlelight and gave nothing back. Bertrard straightened. The wound in his side burned, but the guilt inside him burned hotter. He had fled at Roncevaux while 20,000 brothers died. He had listened to Odo scream his name, pinned beneath his horse, and he had not turned back. Every step since had been borrowed time, borrowed breath. He walked forward. Serlo moved to intercept, but Alena threw herself into his path, slight and dark and fierce. You Franks come with swords and prayers, she spat, but the mountains remember every oath broken. Serlo hesitated, only a heartbeat, but it was enough. Bertrard reached the dais. Charlemagne was still speaking, a low drone of confession. And the Saxon children I ordered drowned in the Aller. They were baptized first, which makes it mercy. Bertrard lifted the crown from the king's head. The iron was cold in his hands, colder than mountain stream water, and it hummed against his palms with that low vibration he remembered from the cavern. It whispered to him of his own betrayals, of the terror that had turned his legs to water when the Basque horns sounded and the arrows began to fall. It promised him peace if he would only listen, only yield. I am not listening to you, Bertrard said aloud, though no one else could hear the whisper. I am listening to them. He set the crown upon his own head. The weight of it was immense, not the weight of iron, but the weight of every ruined emperor, every murdered senator, every maddened general who had worn it before him. It crushed down against his temples, and for a moment he felt the world tilt and the darkness yawn beneath him. But he had carried a heavier weight for 25 days, the weight of Odo's voice. The weight of Roland's horn, sounding and never answered. Bertrard drew Giselher's knife from his belt. The blade was short and serviceable, a guard's tool, and it caught the candlelight like a sliver of ice. My brothers, he said, and his voice was steady now, steadier than it had been since Roncevaux. Roland, Odo, all of you who stood and fell while I fled. I have walked every day since in your shadows. Now I walk toward you. He drove the knife into his heart. The pain was a white flame, and then it was gone, and with it went the weight of the crown. He felt the circlet shudder on his brow, felt the silver begin to run like water, felt the iron crumble to dust. It poured off his head in a dark cascade, hissing where it struck the flagstones, and the air in the hall cleared as though a storm had broken. Charlemagne gasped. The glaze vanished from his eyes, and he looked down at the dying man before him with an expression first of confusion, then of dawning comprehension, then of grief. Seize him, the king said. And his voice was his own again. hoarse, horrified, but his own. He pointed at Fulcrad. Seize the bishop. Fulcrad's composure shattered. He stepped back, his amber eyes darting, and Serlo's men, Giselher among them, the guard whose knife had cut Bertrard's bonds in the mountain camp, closed in. The bishop's vestments tore as he struggled, and a small folded parchment skittered across the floor, its crimson seal stamped with a serpent coiled around a crown. One of the Lombard counts stooped to retrieve it, his brow furrowing. Serlo did not move to intervene. He stood with his sword lowered, his pale blue eyes fixed on the melting remnants of the crown, and said nothing. Bertrard lay on the cold stones, and the world was fading, but it did not fade into darkness. It faded into light. He saw the pass at Roncevaux, not as it had been on that black day, but green and golden under a high summer sun. He saw Roland whole and unbroken, his great horn Oliphant slung across his back, and beside him stood Odo, his brother, his blood, the one who had called his name as the arrows fell. Odo was smiling. "You came back," Odo said. Bertrard tried to speak. The words would not come, but they did not need to. He felt the guilt lift from him like a physical thing. A stone he had carried so long he had forgotten its shape now rolled away. The light was warm on his face, and there was no more weight, no more shame, no more flight. Alena knelt beside him, her warm brown hands pressing his chest where the knife had entered. But she was already too late, and she knew it. Her black eyes met his grey ones, and something passed between them. Gratitude, farewell, a quiet recognition that he had done what the carvings promised, a willing death. For the sake of another, Bertrard's lips moved once more, shaping a name his brother would recognize, and then he was still.